In this walkthrough video, we're going to take a look at how you can use Nintex Workflow Cloud in conjunction with your CRM system to automate your renewals process. In this particular walkthrough, we're going to be leveraging Salesforce as our system of record. However, this solution could be applied to other CRM systems, such as Microsoft's Dynamics CRM. While we're going to be building this workflow from scratch, if you would like a copy of this workflow, you can go to gallery.nintex.com to access the Nintex Process Accelerator Gallery. From there, if you select Workflows, make sure you're on Nintex Workflow Cloud, enter your Nintex Workflow Cloud tenant ID, and then find Automated CRM Renewals, you can download a template of this workflow directly into your Nintex Workflow Cloud environment. The first step in building any workflow is configuring the start event. In this case, we're actually going to be using a scheduled start for this workflow. We will have this workflow run every day, and it will check our CRM for any records that are ready to be processed for the renewal. To configure this, we'll select Start Event, Scheduled Start, and then we can go ahead and give it a start date. In this case, we'll select August 19th at 12 a.m. We can set our time zone, and then we'll set this to recur every day. Next, what we're going to do is we're actually going to use a Run Parallel Paths action to build a collection of the different days from renewal that we would like to process. This will include 180 days, 90 days, 30 days, and 0 to indicate the day of the renewal. We'll then leverage the Add Item to Collection action to build the collection of days till renewal that we will be using to process our different records. And we'll rename this first set of parallel actions to Create Date Collection. We'll give our first property the index of 0, as collections start at 0, and then we'll increment up from there. The second one will have an index of 1, the value of 90, the third an index of 2, a value of 30, and the fourth an index of 3 and a value of 0. Now that we have our days till renewal collection, we can actually loop through each one of these values and check for records that are that far from their renewal date. We'll pass it our collection of days till renewal, and then we'll get our data type of integer. This will then build our loop for each object, which we'll be able to reference later in the workflow. We'll then leverage the Add Time to Date action to calculate out the desired renewal date based on the integer that we are using in our loop and today's date. For our date, we'll set the context of current date. We'll then take our days till renewal integer and add that as days. As remember, this current item will be either 180, 90, 30, or 0. And we'll then output this as a new variable of date renewal date. We will then use the format date to string operations action to update our renewal date value into a specific format that matches what we have in our CRM. In this case, it'll be the year-month-day format, and we'll output this back as a text string called txt renewal date. Once we have this value, we can now do our query into Salesforce for any contracts that will end on our given renewal date. We'll select our connection. Our object will be contracts. And we'll set our condition to look for any contracts that have an end date is on our txt renewal date. And we also want to make sure they have a status equal to activated. This is going to be a custom status to our environment. Your contracts may have different statuses within your own CRM. We'll then return the results from this query into a collection, and we'll call this col record IDs. Now that we have found the records that meet our renewal date criteria, it's time to actually process these renewal contracts. Depending on our step in the workflow, we either want to send them a notification letting them know how many days they have until their renewal, or we want to execute their renewal and update the related records within our CRM system. We'll leverage a for each action that will loop through our collection of records. Our output data type will be text this time instead of integer. The first step in processing these records will be getting some information out of Salesforce related to the account. We'll use this in our notifications or processing later in the workflow. We'll configure our retrieve so that we get back our account ID, owner ID, status, and contract end date. We'll then store each of these into their own variable. Now that we have that information about the contract and account, we can leverage the owner ID to get information about the contract owner as well, such as their first name and email address. We'll also leverage this same technique to get the information from the primary account contact from our CRM. In our particular instance, we actually have to look up the contact based on their role and then use a get item from collection action to extract that out after our query. Once we have the right contact's ID, we can then use that to look up their first name and email address, which will be used for notifications later in the workflow. Now that we've retrieved all of our information from Salesforce, we now have to determine if we simply need to send an email to let the customer know that their renewal is upcoming, or actually process the renewal if the renewal is due today. To accomplish this, we're going to use a branch by value action. Our variable to evaluate will be our for each days till renewal current item. And then we'll go ahead and update our branches to be the 180, 90, 30, and 0 that align with the number of days till renewal. We'll use the set a variable value action. We'll update the action description to set email subject. We'll then create a new variable of email subject, and we'll give it a value of your subscription will auto-renew in 180 days. We can then repeat this process for both the 90 and 30 branch with a slight variation to the subject. In our 0 branch, we want to make sure that our subject lets them know that their subscription is renewing today. And now it's time to actually update the records in Salesforce to process that renewal. This will mean that we need to expire the old contract, close the renewal opportunity, calculate the renewal date, and then create a new contract for the next year's renewal. To accomplish this, we'll use the update a record action to expire the old contract, query record to look for the open renewal ops that need to be closed, get item from collection to get that opportunity ID, update a record to close the opportunity, add time to date to calculate a new renewal date, and then the two create a record actions to create a new renewal opportunity and a new contract. To expire our old contract, we simply need to pass it the current item's contract ID as the record, and then update our status from activated to draft. To find the open renewal opportunity, we'll do a query for any opportunities that have the same account ID, and closed is no, as we want it to be that open opportunity. We'll then extract out the ID from that collection that we get, and then use the same ID that we got from our collection to find the opportunity that needs to be updated and set its status to closed. We'll next calculate a new renewal date by passing our current date and then adding 12 months to it, and setting our output as date new renewal date. This will then be used in our next step of create new renewal opportunity, where our close date will be that date new renewal date. Our name will be our account ID renewal. We'll set the stage to prospecting, and then we can go ahead and store our record ID into a new variable of txt new op ID. Finally, we'll create a new contract with our related account ID. We'll set our status to activated, and then we can pass it the same owner ID from the previous contract. The last step in our workflow will actually be notifying the customer of the status of their renewal. To do this, we'll use the send an email action. Inside of this, we'll set our recipient email address as the txt primary contact email that we got earlier in the workflow when retrieving the information from Salesforce. We can go ahead and add the owner email as a BCC, and then we can pass it our email subject variable that we constructed in the branch above. And finally, we can update the message body with some custom text letting them know that their contract is due to be updated. If we'd like, we can also log a note to the contract in Salesforce letting everyone know that we've sent a user this email for our records. And with that, we've now concluded our automated renewal workflow. While this will just act as a template, we're excited to see how you can take this type of process and implement it within your Salesforce or Dynamics CRM environment. If you'd like to see other solutions using Nintex Workflow Cloud, please be sure to check out our other solution walkthrough videos. We can't wait to see what you build next.